This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Boz Digital Labs, and JZ Microphones. So get ready to rock.
You don't want to, and this is especially true with overheads, you don't want to look at the kit as like a straight-on thing from the drummer's perspective. You kind of have to tilt things a little bit so you have the kick in the middle, like right between the overhead mics, and you also have the snare in the middle. So I sort of turn things a little bit to the right, like clockwise on the drum kit, and I do the same thing with the room mics, so it's not all kick in one side and snare in the other side.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. This episode is sponsored by OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, your trusted source for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and used Macs for your studio. Let OWC focus on keeping your studio Mac in killer condition so that you can focus on making great music. Why ditch your existing Mac when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and learn how you can supercharge your studio Mac. The speed to create, the capacity to dream. Now find out how awesome your studio can be at OWC. This episode is sponsored by Boz Digital Labs, offering you the coolest plugins for your mixes, like the Hoser XT and Plus 10 dB Signature Series. You can transform your drums with Sasquatch Kick Machine or Transgressor, get massive bass with Big Clipper, or add width and depth using Mongoose and Imperial Delay. All Boz Digital Labs plugins are available as fully functioning, no time limit free trials, so you can check them out on your mixes right now. Just go to bozdigitallabs.com or click the link in the show notes of this episode. This episode is sponsored by JZ Microphones with the unique Golden Drop capsule design. The Black Hole Series BH1S and BH2 microphones with the hole in the middle for a one-of-a-kind shock mount combine innovative industrial design with careful craftsmanship to bring a world-class sound to your studio, resulting in a level of quality and detail in your recordings that you won't find in other mics. Go to jzmic.com or click the link in the show notes below and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR right now to get an incredible 50% off. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Jon Fintel, a producer in Columbus, Ohio, where he has worked at a variety of studios in the 1990s before finally opening his own studio, Relay Recording, in 2002. His mission at Relay Recording the past 17 years has been to create an environment where artists can experience the joy of musical discovery, while Relay has developed a reputation for stellar sound quality and top-shelf artist experience. Way Yes, the Worn Flints, Mark Lomax are just a few of the artists that have worked with Jon at Relay, where he combines a dedication to sonic and musical detail with a relaxed attitude that makes artists comfortable and lets them enjoy the process. I'm super impressed with Jon's awesome sounding discography, and I've included a YouTube playlist and a Spotify player in the blog post of his work, which you can find in the show notes. Just click through on your mobile device or go to rsrockstars.com to the website to find it. Also, a thanks and a shout out to Jason Knox for making the introduction. So please welcome Jon Fintel to Recording Studio Rockstars. Jon, are you ready to rock, dude?
I am ready.
All right, dude. Well, glad to have you here on the podcast. In full transparency, Rockstars, Jon and I have put in Herculean efforts to make this happen. We of course, the internet didn't really want to behave with us getting ready for this, but now we got a great sound and we're ready to kick it.
Yeah. I feel better having gone through that with you.
You know,
actually.
Your voice really does sound good now. So we went from, it's almost exemplary of a recording studio experience, because sometimes you just walk in and the sounds just don't sound good and you just have to jump through all kinds of hoops to finally get it to work. But if it does sound good in the end, you feel good about it.
Right. Some days it's a journey.
Some days it's a journey. Maybe we're kicking it off with your inspirational quote right there.
Right.
So Jon, give us an introduction in your own words to who you are and how you got into recording.
Well, I am mostly I started off as a songwriter and have been doing that since I was roughly 15 when I started playing the guitar. And it kind of came out of that more from the musician side. And after going to college and trying a number of different majors that did not work out for me, I went to recording school and came back here, and here I am.
And here is Columbus, Ohio. Now, is that
here is Columbus, Ohio. That's right.
I think, so tell us where you went to recording school and what that experience was like for you. Also, when was that?
I went to Full Sail, Center for the Recording Arts, and I graduated the end of 1994, Lidge.
Ah, nice. Full Sail was, I don't remember exactly when it started, but I got the impression when I was looking at schools in 91 that Full Sail was kind of new on the scene at that point.
Well, it was new in Orlando, I think. I don't think they had been there that many years, but it started in Dayton, I believe. Dayton, Ohio, which is only... Yeah, a little over an hour from here, from where I am right now. And then they moved to Orlando and expanded. It's Winter Park, so it's like the northeast side of Orlando. And I think it was a different school from what I understand. I haven't been keeping up with it as much as I could. But I think they've gone into so many other things, like as far as filmmaking and...
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, like app creation and web design and graphics and stuff like that. So... When I went there, they had a smaller video program and then the recording part of it, and that was it.
Well, it's sort of funny because the recording seems like a discipline all in its own, but in a way, it's just one aspect of creating something that, is a creative art that we can consume, which was listening off a cassette on a pair of speakers, listening off a CD on a pair of speakers. Now it's, streaming off your whatever onto a handful of speakers in your car. But really, the creative arts have sort of evolved and video production is such an aspect of things. And then music and sound gets intertwined with video games and 3D virtual reality experiences. And, I'm not going anywhere specific with this other than just this reminder that really we're just like into experiencing somebody's creation and music on a left and a right channel is just one aspect of that.
Right. And I think they're similar in a lot of ways because if you are shooting a video, and I do sound for video productions and commercials and stuff like that occasionally. But I think it's similar in the way that you're capturing something as you are with audio and you are with video, then you're editing something and then you're presenting something, and it's all something that has to be produced, thought out ahead of time, and sort of put together in a way that has meaning. So
yeah, totally.
And the more video production there is, the more need for music. So
right. And I feel often like the kinds of decisions you make when you're producing visual content, video stuff, in a lot of ways, they feel very similar to the decisions you make when you're producing music.
Yeah, and you can tell the producers that get it, and the producers that are still figuring it out, the same way you can with audio producers, music producers.
Yeah, true. And the music. Now, do we think that the producers that get it and the ones that are figuring it out, that we'll find both of them on Netflix in that endless library of content?
I'm sure somewhere in there. Yeah, but there are so many that get it. There are probably not that many that don't. That are on Netflix. All
right, you probably have to get it on a certain level to arrive there.
Yeah,
it's a lot easier to find producers of music that don't get it on SoundCloud and Spotify and places like that.
Well, it's a lot cheaper to create, something in your bedroom than trying to shoot a movie.
Yeah. Speaking of which, when you started out doing this stuff, how much stuff were you creating in your bedroom? Were you on a 4-track?
I skipped that. I kind of skipped that whole thing. The only thing I did a lot of cassette business, like recording songs into a cassette and then playing it back while playing another part over it and going back and forth. And it just sounded like garbage, but I was just trying to get some ideas down.
Beautiful garbage.
Screwing around. Yeah. So I went to recording school. I did some of the little cassette stuff before that and then went to recording school, came back And it came back into what I thought it was a job, honestly, because, we talked about money and then found out no, it's an internship, pal. So that was pretty awesome. But I stuck around there. So I was right into a studio and didn't have like a home studio or anything.
Do you recall that having that credit from going to recording school really opened the door to an internship for you? Or did you ever feel like you could have gotten an internship without necessarily going to recording school? What input do you have on that?
It definitely did. It did in this particular case, because the guy that I talked to, he thought that I could show him some things, which there are a few things that I knew that were like more modern. Because we were using a tape machine and everything there, and I had worked on Pro Tools a little bit, in school. Mm-hmm. So there were a few things that I could show him, and he was excited to, he wanted me to teach him some things, but he was pretty brilliant in his own right. So
let's also remember for the rock stars that when we say worked in Pro Tools, we're talking about like maybe 4 tracks total in Pro Tools at that point. Like maybe it was a little bit more than that at this point, but yeah, Pro Tools when it started was it wasn't even considered. It was like a piece of outboard gear in the studio. It was like you would send some stuff over to it, do something with it, and then send it back again.
Right. Like using the audio suite or something like that, or whatever it was. And the big thing was when you're in the workshop in Pro Tools, because you'd have like a couple people on one workstation. And the big thing was do not render the file. And it was like in all caps, do not render the file, because it took so long to do it. And if you accidentally did it, just like hit enter for some reason, everybody just threw up there, you rendered the file. We'd walk out for like 5 or 10 minutes.
Right, because computers were just jammed up. Nobody could use it.
It just took forever, and everybody'd get upset. It's like, you're wasting our time.
Yeah, I remember this similar experience in a video animation course I took at school, where they had like closets full of computing power to animate these really blocky kind of things that you could probably do in a Chrome browser right now effortlessly over the internet. And it would take all night just to render the stuff. And then you find out that it looked terrible.
Wasn't there one thing called the toaster or something like that? That was one of the video editing.
Oh, probably.
Like effects things,
Yeah. I mean, I didn't get deep into that stuff. I took one class and thought it was pretty fascinating. And then
Chiron.
Chiron. That sounds like a Klingon name for a video editing software.
Yeah, right. The next Avengers movie.
All right,
they're fighting Chiron.
All right, so cool. I'll try and bring us back on track here. Tell us more about you can win from internship. You opened Relay Recording, but I think you were telling me before that you've had a few iterations of your studio as well.
I did. And I interned at a few places first. Worked freelanced. And then I built Relay in 2002. And that was in a small house in Bexley, Ohio, which is just like the near downtown east side of Columbus. So I was there, and the drummer in my band at the time was going through a divorce and had this small house in Bexley and couldn't figure out how to make the mortgage. So he said, "Hey, put your studio over here." So I hired a contractor that I knew to build out the basement of that place and moved Nate in the basement. And then I took over the rest of the house.
Nice.
So
priorities.
It's kind of like, just stay down there. There were a couple instances that were pretty entertaining where he thought that there was no one in the house, and the control room was kind of across from where he kept his towels, and Nate decided he was gonna shower. So, he comes strolling out of the shower to grab a towel. That was cool. So that was my in-house experience there.
Nice.
So then he got a girlfriend, of course, and I had to move out.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
that's never happened before.
You're right. So she was nesting, from what I understand. Anyway, so I found another place, luckily, that is it's actually closer to downtown Columbus, and was there for 6 years, 2004 to 2010. Yes, 6 years. And that place was a lot bigger. It was a full commercial studio. that I built out and put a lot of money into. And that was purchased by an insurance company across the street that is a large conglomerate of something. And they decided they needed more parking. So they bought that land and kicked me out, bulldozed the building. So I was, again, looking for a building for the studio. And then, of course, like a couple months later, they laid off 400 people and there were like 8 cars in that entire lot now.
Right.
So
they paved paradise.
Yeah, it looks great. It's a really good looking parking lot.
Nashville's turning into a lot of parking lots, and they're all becoming paid parking lots.
Oh yeah, that's what we're doing here. Meters everywhere.
But I did hear a story recently of one of the paid parking lots that's next to a studio. I was sort of offended by it at first, and then I learned that it's there to help make sure that there's actually some spots available for the studio, and it's helping to pay for the studio. And I was like, oh, I feel a little bit better about it now.
Oh, it's helping to pay for the studio.
It's owned by the studio owners.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, all right.
Yeah, sure. Why not? One more service they are providing.
There you go. Okay, cool. So now you're in your third and hopefully final and present location?
Yes. I like it here. So we'll see. It's Columbus, so who knows?
How would you describe your space? What's it like? I mean, is it like one little closet? Is it like
it's
a
massive.
Gymnasium?
I mean, this place is really big. That's one of the first things that people say when they come here. They say it's big, and they also say it's incredibly comfortable. It's like every other person that comes in for the first time is like, I really feel at home here, which nice. I don't know why. Yeah. So I'm glad. I mean, maybe it's the fact that it was a gay bar before I moved in here. So I think it's the spirit of RuPaul has blessed the place, which is awesome. So, yeah, it's really big. It's like over 3,700 square feet. The live room is huge. It's big enough, and I have enough stuff here that I get calls from bands that are on tour that need to rehearse before their show. Will come here. So I've had like 3 days grace here. I've had Passion Pit was here this is a good one. Passion Pit was here for 3 days. It's probably been 3 years ago now, but they had 2.5 semi trucks worth of stuff in this building. That's how big the building is. Yeah. I mean, there were like road cases down the hall. They had all their stuff set up, which their stuff, they have so much stuff. I think it's 26 or 27 keyboards in their live setup and 6 people in the band. Plus we had a monitor engineer set up with his Avid console and another guy that was set up that sort of runs Ableton, Robbie Barr, who's a genius. And he sort of runs everything. Everything's networked together. So all the tempos for the keyboards and the guitar pedals that take MIDI and everything. So, I mean, that's how big the live room is. It's pretty huge.
Were they prepping for a festival show up in Ohio or something like that, or just getting ready for the summer?
They were prepping for a show, I think, at it's one of the Promo West places in town. So it was probably Express or the Newport. I don't know. But apparently they bailed on that and they got offered a show at Ohio State to play in the Oval for the students that paid them like 3 times as much as what Promo was going to pay.
It's funny. I remember hearing stories about college gigs for bands that the pay was always really handsome. Like, there would be some well-funded budget for hiring bands to come play college shows. And so that was always desirable.
Yeah, I always think, kids, your tuition at work. You get to see Passion Pit. If it's a band you really don't like, then you're like, what? I want my $15 back.
We got to see the Romantics, and they were up there playing.
Wow!
I hear the secrets that you keep. And we were punk ass kids, and like throwing fruit up at the stage or something stupid like that.
But they had the leather jackets and the big curly hair. Right?
I didn't get it when I was younger. I'm still trying to get it. Just life in general now as I'm older, but. You do stupid stuff when you're a kid, you act like a punk, and then later you're that thing that you didn't understand or maybe didn't think was cool or something. Then later you come back to it and you're like, shit, I had no idea. It was really actually quite cool.
Right. I saw Soul Asylum when I was in high school. Do you remember Soul Asylum, Runaway Train? All
Yeah,
that?
I wasn't a fan of theirs, but I totally remember the band name. Yeah.
Well, they had like the Goo Goo Dolls open up when the Goo Goo Dolls were real heavy. So I went to that show and actually had my nose. I had my nose broken at a Soul Asylum show.
Wow, mosh pit.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody was like,
Just somebody's elbow going backwards.
no, it was the back of this guy's skull, who was probably like 6'4" and just like head banging, pulled his head back right on top of my nose. It was, I don't know how he did it. I must have been way close, and he was pretty flexible. That's a heck of a back bend right there.
Did he even stop? Did he stop his mosh?
He had no clue.
No clue.
Yeah. He just felt some blood in his hair. It was like, hey.
Wow. All right. Well, so you've got a huge space in your studio. Talk about what that means as far as your control room. Is it particularly big or small? And either way, what have you learned about the sound of your monitors in different spaces for a control room? And then also, do you have multiple isolation booths and rooms for recording, or do you just sort of use one big space like Olympic Studios, in the Rolling Stones, and just like block things off with gobos?
Well, I kind of do a little of both, depending on the situation. The control room is actually a pretty decent size. I mean, of course, I would like the control room to be a little bit bigger, but whatever. It's still pretty large. And it got smaller once I moved this console in here, which is massive.
What's your console?
It is a 1983 Trident Series 80B.
Ooh.
So 32 inputs.
That's a great console. It's very, my experiences with those is I describe them as kind of hard sounding because they have they're punchy and also just like real clear top end. And then I remember doing some rock stuff and just really liking the way rock comes through a console like that.
It's almost like they were built for rock. So I don't know. I almost feel like it's a cross between like an API and a Neve, and maybe. Are you familiar with the John Hardy preamps?
Yeah,
Yeah, it kind of has that vibe about them too. I don't know. Those John Hardys are fantastic preamps. If I could only use one mic preamp for the rest of my life, it'd probably be those.
Really? Are they still making the John Hardy pre's, or is that like from when I remember them back in the 90s?
I mean, they were up to a couple of years ago, because I sent one to him. I had one that was had three, because it comes in a rack space thing that has like 4 bays for 4 different units or 4 different preamps. So I sent one to him to get another one added on, and I think it took me a long time to get back. So I think he's still there. I don't know what he's doing as far as like building new preamps or anything, but he's out of Chicago, and I don't know. I talked to him on the phone. He's a really nice guy.
Cool. All right. So the Trident 80B, and then how do you use your console when you're working? Do you still use a tape machine, or are you sort of in Pro Tools? And do you like to break out all these channels onto the console when you mix, or how does a console get integrated? I'm using everything as just as like separate inputs into Pro Tools. I have a tape machine, but I haven't used it in a couple years, and that's fine. Because I like it, but I don't like it enough that I'm willing to just go through the slog that is, what I mean, recording on analog tape. I don't want to put it down. Mine hasn't been turned on in 2 years.
Yeah.
It's just,
and I feel bad since you just talked to the Mara Machines person, and they sound like amazing.
Oh, they are
amazing machines.
They really are. And I have a MCI JH16, and I love the way it sounds. But it's like you say, any tool you got in the studio, it's got to be part of your workflow. If it is not part of getting to the music faster, you're going to ditch it quickly,
Right. I don't want to. I'll come up with an idea, and it'll be in my head and out of it almost just as quickly. So if I don't get it down sometimes, just because I'm thinking of a million other things at the same time, then it doesn't get recorded. So just doing that with tape sometimes, I'm like, well, what were we? I don't know. That's just me. And
to clarify that, if a tape machine in my studio situation, it doesn't get me to the music fast enough, it might actually get somebody else to the music faster in a different studio situation. So like, there's nothing universal about the gear in that way. It's like, it just depends on the user and the studio environment and what kind of music you're making.
Right. And then there's that one, I cannot think of the name of it. What is that unit that hooks Pro Tools up to your tape machine? So you basically are running the tape machine with the Pro Tools transport. It starts with a C.
The clasp system?
Clasp, yes.
Yeah.
Now, if I had one of those, that might be worth it.
Well, I'm going to give you a little tip. You don't necessarily need it, although it may be a great system to have, but you don't need it. I actually invented the free version of it with my patch bay. You just simply mult every time you're going to record something, you mult it at the patch bay so that one goes to the tape machine and it bounces off the tape, and then the other one goes straight into Pro Tools, either on a second audio track or on an aux input so you can hear it. And then you just record stuff to tape and then just shift it back, the same amount of samples every time for your tape speed and your sample rate.
So do you have twice as many tracks in your Pro Tools section?
Yeah, if you record both into Pro Tools and to the tape, then you end up with double tracks. So it's a little bit of a extra, couple of steps. So in that respect, maybe the clasp thing would be easier because you wouldn't have to, I don't know, maybe you don't have to have double the tracks or something. Or maybe you just don't have to think about it. I don't know. Either way, I'm probably not going to do it, Lidge. That's all right, man.
Probably isn't going to happen.
I have to be honest, I'm really enjoying the process of learning how to make things sound great in the box in Pro Tools without having to even leave the computer. And I'm just constantly amazed at how good it can sound if you do the right moves that way.
Yeah, I actually did a test. In fact, I sent you 2 songs. I sent you 3 that I just mixed and mastered. And 2 of those were done on the console, and 1 of those was done in the box. I'm curious we can talk about it later, but I'm curious if you could tell which is which.
Okay. Maybe, we'll chat about it after, but maybe there's a way I can include, I don't know if those are links that you sent that can go in the blog post and, we can put
They're not out yet. So that's why they're in the additional listening.
All right, rock stars, you'll just have to wonder.
That's right. They'll be out though. They'll be out eventually, and I'll put them on the Spotify thing and you can put them on the YouTube thing.
This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free introduction to mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you are in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Awesome. So your Trident ADB, your console, is being used in a way where you're using it for the recording, and then you go into Pro Tools. And then once you're in Pro Tools, do you tend to just listen to the left and right output, the master output, or do you, again, break it back out to the console when you go to mix?
Yeah, I break it out when I mix, and that's it. That's the first time it comes back through the board. Because if I had to set the console up every time, like for every project that came in, it would be a real pain,
Okay, so you're not recording through the console, or
No, I am recording through the console, going into Pro Tools, and the console just sort of it stays in whatever state I last used it in.
Mm-hmm.
So. And then once it's in Pro Tools, we're done doing all the overdubs and everything else. Then I'll split everything out onto the console and have the console set up in a way that works well for mixing.
I got it. All right. So if the console is, 24 inputs or something like that, while you're recording, it's as if there were just 24 mic pre's going into Pro Tools to record with. And then once you're ready to sort of switch into mix mode, now you route all the outputs of Pro Tools to the 24 channels of the console. And now it's 24 faders for mixing.
Yes, it is. It's actually 32.
Okay. I had to start with some
32,
number.
man. Come on.
I had to pick something. But cool. I think that helps for, rock stars who are maybe considering, how do I integrate a console into a situation? And it's cool to know that it can just play 2 roles. It can be like the recording side and then the mixing side. So while you're recording, through the console. At that stage, yes, you're just listening to the stereo output of Pro Tools until you're ready to break it out into mix mode.
Yeah. And it took me a little while to develop that sort of hybrid approach, I guess. Because I got the board, I'm like, how am I going to do this? Am I going to run everything back through the board and then use the aux outs as the headphones? But I mean, it only has 5, you know what I mean? So it doesn't really have enough outputs to make great headphone mixes anyway. And then you'd have to set it up again, like I was saying. If you can just keep everything in Pro Tools as long as possible and then bust it out for the mix to get the sound of the board.
Yeah. What are some things that you like about mixing on the console? Are there any sonic things where you're like, this is the way I get the sound I want? Or is it, does it have to do with workflow?
It kind of does. And what I found out by mixing one song in the box and one song, I just did them sort of back to back, one song on the console and one in the box. I can do a mix on the console about an hour and a half faster.
Wow, really? Okay.
Yeah. And I'm not really sure. It's just like gets you to that sound that you're looking for faster. It's crazy. But one of the things that I do that I think makes a huge difference is I'm doing like parallel compression on the drums, especially. And it's it's sort of already set up on the board to work that way. Mm-hmm. I don't like zeroing everything out and resetting it every time. So when I'm going back through the console, I'll like send the drums down through the first, I think 12 faders or something like that. And then I'll make a separate mix on there's a stereo aux on this console. So I'll use that aux out and send that back into a couple channels at the end of the board. Mm-hmm. So it's like 31 and 32 are basically my dry drums. And then 29 and 30 would be my compressed drums, which then I'm bussing out, and I take the bus outs, run it into a pair of distressors that I have, smash the hell out of it, bring it back in. And that's kind of how my blend works.
Okay. We're going to geek out immediately. So, first question is, do you ever do that kind of parallel routing at the recording stage so that while you're recording the song, you're already hearing the parallel compressed drums? That, of course, is one of the benefits of using a console at the recording stage, where you can't do parallel processing during recording if you're recording straight into Pro Tools because of the latency effect.
Right. I have never tried doing it directly into Pro Tools. I have a couple compressors that have a mix knob that would give me that parallel compression. And I do that sometimes with, like, I usually have a mic that I set sort of on top of the kick drum called the crotch mic, of course. Mm-hmm. And so I have that's sort of kind of over the kick drum, a little bit of the snare, and I'll parallel compress that going into Pro Tools. But that's about the only thing that I do parallel, because I have a bunch of outboard pre's that I'm using for drums as well. Like I have a pair of APIs that I use on the snare. I usually use the Hardys on kick drum, so it'd be pretty difficult to do an actual parallel that way.
Right. Unless you went back through the console from all those.
Right. Which okay. I don't know. Sometimes I do that because the EQs on the board are ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, I've done that. Like if I can't get something to sound just perfect, I'll run it back through the console and send it that way and use the EQs.
Can you describe the way the EQs work on the board? I know it's, I'm putting you on the spot to remember all the frequencies and stuff, but to the extent that you can, what have you got available for EQ on that board?
Well, it's got a high shelving EQ, then it has a mid band. It's not fully parametric, so it doesn't have a Q. There's no bandwidth control, unfortunately.
Is it one of those cues that the more you boost it, the narrower it gets?
I don't know. It's not. What is that called?
I don't know, and I don't really know why that's considered better or not. But I like it. It's intriguing.
The board I used to work on at a former studio I worked at had EQs like that, and it's kind of cool because it it just builds a tighter peak the more you crank it. So
it
I don't know.
Just gives you the sense of getting more action out of the EQ sooner without having to actually boost it so much.
Yeah, and it allows you to boost it a little bit more though too, because you're like, if I crank the hell out of something on this EQ, it's going to bring up a lot of the other frequencies that you probably don't want. And what I end up doing is taking a band that is close by to that frequency and cutting that just to sort of make the curve. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay, so you got a high shelf, you got a mid. Do you have more than one mid frequency you can boost or cut?
There's a high mid and a low mid.
Okay. And then those have sweepable knobs. And then what about the lows? You've got a low shelf.
There's a low shelf, and it gives you the high and the low both give you two frequencies to choose from. So those are not variable besides the two frequencies. And the low is like 120 and 60.
Yeah.
And then there's a high pass 50, which is, it's got to be like 3 dB per octave or something, because it's pretty
gentle.
Yeah, very gentle. It's
barely does anything. Oh, it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice, but there are some things you're like, that's going up too high, and you think, well, 50, that's a pretty low frequency, but you hit it and you'll hear it like all the way up to probably 100.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and I think a lot of these, just riffing here, but I think some of these frequency choices originally made for consoles had to do with trying to control levels hitting the tape machine too, and just going what tape could handle. But who knows, maybe it's strictly sonic, but I wouldn't be surprised if it also just had to do with how it was hitting the tape.
Well, the high band is either 8K or 12K. So,
right.
Which is pretty up there.
Yeah. All right, dig it. Now let's talk about the geek question I wanted to ask you. Pair of distressors on, you said you're slamming it with distressors for parallel. Talk to us about some of the settings that you might go to quickly for that. I'm
either using 4:1 or 3:1 on the ratio. I always use distortion on those things. I love saturation, distortion, heavy compression, stuff like that. So I always use distortion. Well, normally distortion 3. They sound a little bit different, 1 or a 2 and 3. I'm using a high pass. When I'm mixing, I'm using the high pass in the side chain, because I don't want it to, slam the low end of it or be affected by it. And that's about it. If I'm doing 3:1, it's usually maybe like the attack is on 3, the release is on 1 or something like that. 4:1, it's usually 2.5 is where I have the attack set. And sometimes I use the stereo image switches. And I have like I think it's like the EL8X or something like that has the British mod. I rarely use the British mode switch. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, but I mean, you're in Columbus, Ohio, here in the U.S., so why would you?
I don't know. I have a British console. That's maybe that's enough British for me.
Right. We drink coffee, not tea.
That's right.
All right, cool. So I, at the risk of maybe asking too opaque of a question, if you talked about 3:1 and 4:1 ratios on that parallel compression, but you also described it as really slamming it. If you used a higher 10:1 or a nuke mode or something, what would turn you off about that, or what would you hear that makes you go back to the 3:1 and 4:1?
I don't know. Sometimes those don't sound as musical, and the 10:1 is emulating an LA2A, so that's a whole other curve. And you know what I mean? You're supposed to turn the attack and release to a certain thing, like it's all the way.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the knee is pretty soft on those things. So I wouldn't use that on drums. I mean, okay. I use it on things like bass and sometimes vocals, but I have other compressors I use for vocals most of the time.
Okay, cool. Do you want to go talk about compressors you like to use for vocals?
I have, what I usually do is, not all the time, but I usually use 2 of them. The first thing I go into is, are you familiar with Lindell Audio?
Yeah, but not very, just only with the name.
Well, I don't know. I don't think they still make them. I don't know, they might, but these are not 500 series rack pieces, which is what you usually see, like if you're on reverb.com or something like that. So it's rack mountable stuff. This is a 17XS compressor that is kind of like an 1176 on steroids. And I like those a lot, and they're not super pricey. I don't really know what's under the hood as far as all the pieces parts in there, but I think they sound great, and they have a mix knob. So the parallel compression with vocals is really where it's at, I think, because you can hit it pretty hard and keep it under control without it sounding like you're really just slamming it. So I usually set that up with a slow attack and a fast release and around 4-to-1 on that. So I'm basically using it like an 1176, and it has a high pass side chain, which is pretty cool.
But you'll use that as a parallel compression to blend in with the uncompressed vocal, or is it?
Well, that thing, because it has a mix knob, it's basically making its own parallel.
Ah, okay.
And if I think I need more than that, then I run it into an Avalon compressor that I have that is an opto compressor and super smooth.
Is that the what is it, the 737?
It's an AD2044.
Okay, cool. So let me ask you this about the parallel compression knob, because sometimes I try and use those in plugin world, and I struggle with trying to figure out what blend really sounds right. And for example, one of the plugins I use now is the Manic compressor from Boz Digital Labs, and he actually sort of wisely put in two faders. So you've got a dry fader and a parallel or compressed fader, and it feels more like better. Blending on a console,
Mm-hmm.
But when you do the knob, do you feel like there's any useful rules about where that blend knob ends up when you're doing sort of the right thing with parallel?
It usually ends up around 6 or 7. And I tag it pretty good. Like my meter, I'm probably taking out like 6 or 7 dB, which some people are going to listen to. That is way too much. But when you blend it in underneath, the dry vocal, it's pretty cool.
So you're compressing it, taking off like 7 dB of compression, and then the knob is on dry, so you're hearing the uncompressed vocal, and then you start sneaking in the compressed. And like what percentage, or
I'm sneaking in like 70%.
Oh, 70%. Okay,
it's
great.
Not much of a sneak.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of compression. It's more like you're sneaking in a little bit of the dry vocal.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And and a lot of that has to do with the kind of music that I'm doing.
Yeah. Which is pretty cool music. We haven't really talked about it. Tell us about the music you're doing. Cause I mean, I love it. Your playlist is full of all kinds of cool music that I'm like, man, I'd like to be making that. In fact, I have to confess to you, yesterday when my schedule was off and I thought we were going to do the interview, and then I had a free 2 hours, I went out and I started playing around with GarageBand in my iPhone and writing a song inspired by some of the stuff I was listening to off of your playlist.
Nice. That's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. I don't know that I wrote a good song, but I'm just saying I was inspired.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it matters if the song is good. You were inspired and did something creative. So
Exactly. All right. So tell us about the genre and style of music that you're working with up in Columbus, Ohio. It certainly didn't strike me as like country music like I'm surrounded with here in Nashville.
It is not country music. I can tell you that. It's like indie rock stuff is mostly what I do. There's a station in town. It's CD 102.5. That's one of the last independent radio stations in the country, and they play a lot of music that is sort of the genre that is big here. So I don't know which came first, chicken or the egg kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's basically like alt rock, indie label type stuff. And right now it seems to be very late 90s inspired.
Is it? Yeah. I've noticed that. It's really funny. I'm going to share a little anecdote. My daughter, who's now 13, we were at the store and she needed to get some clothes or something like that. And she had a little extra money and wanted to try on a jacket and get herself a jacket. So she's trying on a couple of jackets and she's like, "Daddy, what do you think?" And I was like, "That one looks pretty cool." And she's like, how did she ask it? It was something like, "Does it look 80s or 90s?" And I was like, "It looks pretty 90s." And she's like, "Awesome."
Oh,
And it
that's
hit me,
hilarious.
and I was like, wow. I was like, at the age of 13 right now, being retro 90s is really cool. So, you know, as they said in Portlandia, the dream of the 90s.
Right. Well, my girlfriend, she's also 13. No, I'm just kidding. She
Nice segue.
bought, yeah, she does the same thing with the old 90s stuff with the jean jacket and asked me somewhat similar questions. But it's like, if it's 2000s, I'm taking it back.
Right. There you go, man.
That kind of thing.
90s is in. That's good for us older guys. Because
I know that's like right in our wheelhouse.
You know what occurred to me one day as I realized, like, you grow up and you're young and you're listening to this music that you're into, that's new, that's kind of like, a little bit breaking the comfort rules for the older folks, and they're listening to oldies, and you're like, man, when I get old, do I have to listen to oldies? And then later, as I got older, I realized, I was like, holy shit, wait a minute. My oldies are going to be the same indie rock shit that I loved when I was a kid. I get to listen to that all the way through the rest of my life.
Right.
And my generation will also totally dig that music. So that was quite encouraging to me.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, because it wouldn't be like the music that our parents were listening to didn't really come around quite like the 90s and somewhat the 80s too, like came back around. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, you could probably make an argument that it did, or when they were listening to it as oldies, that was the coming back around for them. But, you
have Bublé. Bublé is that music coming back around.
Okay. All right. Dig it. All right. Well, so you're doing cool indie rock.
And jazz. I do a lot of jazz.
Yeah.
Figure that one out.
So the Mark Lomax, Logan Rollins, Java Man was something I wrote down as one of your tracks you sent me.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an awesome example of cool jazz with like a great vibe. How did you record those guys? How are you doing a jazz ensemble like that?
With these guys, and I've worked with Mark a lot. There's another project that we just finished that basically ended up being a total of 12 albums, all dropped on the same day. And we did 7 of those albums here.
Wow.
But we'll get into that in a minute.
That's a box set.
Yeah. I think it's all streaming. So, proverbial box.
Different kind of box.
Right. So what we did for the Logan Rollins stuff, we had 2 horn players, a bass player, a drummer, and a piano player. And the only thing that was separated out was the piano. But we didn't talk about that. I have an ISO booth that has a grand piano in it.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us more about that. Tell us about your ISO booths. Tell us about what it means to separate out a piano for a session like that, and why you would even want to do it.
Well, with jazz, it's either I do it both ways with jazz stuff. It all depends on how they want to play, because jazz musicians can play off of each other. They can sort of mix themselves. Mm-hmm. In this situation, though, we split it because we had a lot going on and we just didn't want to have to deal with it too much. So his name is Bobby Floyd. He was the pianist that day. So we put him in the ISO booth, which is a pretty big ISO booth. I mean, it's big enough for the grand piano and with enough room around it. I have my bass rig, like 2 bass rigs set up in there as well. So it's pretty big. And it's an odd shape, and the ceiling, is at an angle and everything else. So it sounds great. So we put him in there. We had the drums out in the big room and the 2 horns in the big room facing Mark. Mark's the drummer in this situation. And then we had the bass, which I ran into one of the ISO booths. I think he did electric on that. So I have a B15.
Thank God. What a relief.
Those amps are just like, you hook those up and it's like money every time. You don't need anything.
And also, just like I'm making a joke about, it's a lot of instant stress relief if somebody's like, oh, I'm playing electric on this jazz recording. You're like, oh, thank God, I don't have to figure out how to record an upright well.
Yes. Hell yes. I mean, I've done it enough times that I can get like 90% there. And then there's always 10% of like, am I going to use this other mic? And then you have the player that says, I can hear my fingers too much. or something like that. I had a guy in, his name's Junie Booth, who played with Miles and all these other, he was flown in for this session. It's kind of a heavy hitter. He's hilarious. But he had a rented acoustic bass. And I remember I had to record his bass and then make another AUX to send it to, with all the high end dropped out of it that I could send to his headphones, because if he could hear his fingers too much, it freaked him out.
Interesting.
But I didn't want to track it like that, and I wanted to be able to hear what I was doing in the mix and see, what all that clackety business sounded like.
Well, so
and it sounded good.
That I want to hear more about this. I want to ask you in a minute about Mike and the piano and stuff. But before we do that, let's take a quick break for the jam session. And Rockstars, a reminder that we've got links to stuff we're talking about, links to Jon's playlist in the show notes. You can just go through on your mobile device and click through, or if you're at the website, rsrockstars.com, just look for the blog post and you can click through right there. And then if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it there, please remember to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes from us. And drop in any questions below about stuff we're talking about, and we'll be happy to answer them. So we'll see you guys in just a minute for the jam session. Are you using a Mac in your recording studio? Are you tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly? Wouldn't it feel great to have a trusted friend to help you keep your existing Mac and studio setup current and relevant so that you can focus on the thing you love most, which is making great music? Well, now you can rely on OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, whose mission it is to help you get the most mileage out of your existing Mac. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD drive, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac that's ready to rock, OWC will help take your studio far into the future with a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49. Why get frustrated and ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. If you want to design and build a great house, then you're going to need great tools. You could build it with an old hammer and some nails, but it's a whole lot easier to use an air compressor and a nail gun. Well, the same thing goes for mixing. If you really want to create a pro-sounding mix, then it makes a lot of sense to start with a great toolbox of awesome plugins. This is where Boz Digital Labs comes in to help you get killer mixes easily, quickly, and creatively. Provocative will make your vocals sound lush and wide. Transgressor and Manic Compressor can help your drums leap out of the speakers. Gatey Weighty and Big Beautiful Door offer unique new ways to tighten up your tracks, while the Wall will make sure your mixes are in your face and competitive. And my favorite is Sasquatch Kick Machine, which can transform your kick drum from sounding like a home studio cardboard box into the perfect punchy kick without using samples or triggers. To download your unlimited trial of any plugin now or get one of Boz's free plugins, go to bozdigitallabs.com and put the best in your mixing toolbox. Click the link below in the show notes to learn more. If you want to capture every nuance of a great performance in your studio, then you need to start with a microphone that is crafted with great care and attention to detail. JZ Mics in Riga, Latvia designs amazing sounding microphones that are handcrafted with jeweler's precision to bring you incredible detail in your recordings. At the heart of JZ microphones is the unique Golden Drop capsule design, which uses a lighter, faster diaphragm that delivers great clarity and fidelity while avoiding distracting colorations and distortions. Make sure to check out the Black Hole series BH1S and BH2 with the awesome looking hole in the middle of the mic, combining innovative industrial design with meticulous electrical engineering to help your studio sound incredibly expensive for an affordable price. JZ offers a 5-year warranty, free shipping to the US, and 30-day money-back guarantee. Plus, for a limited time, if you use the coupon ROCKSTAR, you will get an astonishing 50% off. I got one. You're hearing my voice right now on the BH1S. So what are you waiting for, Rockstars? Go to jzmic.com or click the link in the show notes below. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Jon Fintel, joining us from Columbus, Ohio, talking about making some killer records up there. We just left off talking about recording jazz. And we'll go into some more questions, specifics about records that Jon's done and working with cool indie rock. Johnny, ready to jam?
Yes.
All right, dude. So piano, you're recording a grand with a jazz ensemble. The grand is in an ISO booth. 2 questions. Did you design it where you could like open up that booth and wheel the piano out to the room to join everybody for recording if you wanted to? Or is this sort of like, you did? Oh, cool.
I did. Yeah. I have double doors on that ISO booth.
So describe how that works in case somebody's thinking about a design like that for their studio.
Well, it's just you measure the piano. The doors that are here are custom sized, and they're actually from the studio I had before this one. And because that place was getting bulldozed, I pulled everything out of that joint that I could.
Nice.
So, and the doors are one of those things because these doors are like specially made, extra heavy. So I moved those here.
What are they made out of? Are they just solid wood? Are they made out of metal?
They're solid wood, and they have windows in them that are, extra thick window, extra thick glass.
Single pane of glass or a couple of panes with the air gap in the middle?
It's 2, and they're different thicknesses, which is important.
Right, because we could touch on that for just a sec, but a piece of glass has a resonant frequency, which means that it's going to shut off a lot of sound coming through it, or I don't know, I want to say a lot, but it's going to shut off sound coming through it. But a certain frequency, the resonant frequency zone of that glass, it's just going to let it right through like there was no glass there at all, right?
Yeah, it'll vibrate and then vibrate the other pane of glass if they're the same thickness, and then it just, there it is, projected into your ISO.
When you do 2 different thicknesses, you're blocking different frequencies, and then it's like the sound kind of gets caught by one of those 2 pieces of glass on its way through.
And I don't sweat that kind of stuff too much. I mean, a little bit of bleed is not the end of the world for a jazz thing, or even some of the other rock stuff that I do,
Yeah, sometimes it gets you the sound that you couldn't have gotten any other way.
Yeah, it's a little bit more live, I guess, sounding. I don't know.
I find sometimes the right kind of bleed on a session, if I put a bunch of mics in the room and everybody's playing together, especially if they're playing no headphones and you can get that balance just right, it actually glues the sound and the mix together in a way that I would struggle to do if everything was isolated.
Right. It glues it together in good ways and bad.
Right. Right.
Especially in the low end where you're like, this, I can't get rid of this other thing in this bass drum.
Yeah.
So
okay, so a pair of heavy doors with glass. How high does the glass go in the door? Is it up at the top of the door? Is it down below? Is it the full height of the door? What's important about where to put that glass so that people can see each other?
Well, when you're sitting on a piano bench, I want you to be able to see out to other, the other musicians. So a lot of it was like line of sight is why I did a lot of the things here. So in the booth itself, it's not a square room. It has, it's almost like it's beveled on one corner, and then the doors are on that beveled side. So you can position yourself in that room so you can see most places in the larger live space.
Okay, cool. It's like a giant piece of cheese.
Well, kind of. It's like a square with a corner cut off.
Okay, all right.
So
dig it. Now let's talk about miking the piano. Oh, sorry. More dumb questions because these are so important. Once you do enough recording, you realize all the dumb questions that become really important. But next one is the doors are big enough so that you can open them and the piano can exit the room. Which way do the doors swing?
Out,
away from the piano.
Yeah, exactly. The door. That's a really good dumb question. Yeah. Brilliant. The doors swing out, and the way that this building is that I'm in now, it has some load-bearing posts that are, you just have to navigate those. So the doors open up and there's this post, but it's far enough out that you can kind of go around it. And then there's a little stage area that's sort of like a live section, like a super reflective area in my live room that has like a little stage. So you have to go around, like between the stage, around the post, and then into the larger space.
Okay. And then what about just the simple movability of a grand piano? Does, I have a Steinway here and it does have the little metal wheels on it. But I've also seen that you can get like dollies, if it's a piano at a school auditorium or, the symphony or something like that, they might have a dolly system for moving that piano around. Is that something that you found you needed, or is it just, do you just use the built-in wheels?
Yeah, I'm using the built-in wheels, which is probably to the detriment of the floor. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
those little wheels, you move them, they're fine, but sometimes the floor gets a little scuffed up, especially in the house I was in when I first started. Because I bought that piano, I took out a giant loan to build the first studio that was 95% equipment. And then I bought the piano, and this is old. This is how Columbus used to be. I was able to pay like $600 a month for this piano.
Nice.
But anyway, I've had it that long, and that there was a wood floor in this house, so I had to be very careful, or Nate would come up and frown at me. Nate was the guy who owned the house. Yeah, it's his hardwood floors, so very gently.
Well, so it is a reminder, though. Originally when my house was the studio and my piano was in the room that had this Saltillo tile floors, like large scale tile, Mexican tile. And that sucks for rolling the piano around.
Oh, yeah. Clunk, 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 clunk. And then your tuning goes south.
Right. So you want to have a smooth surface if you're going to want that piano to be movable. And you can always throw it on
bigger wheels.
Yeah, or bigger wheels. You can always throw it on a rug and then lift the rug when it's time to move the piano and put it back down again in the, the space that you want to be deadened or whatever. But recently my floors got swapped out here at the studio because we had some water issues from my neighbors building a house in their backyard. But I ended up with a floor design that is like, it looks like wood, but really it's linoleum. And man, it's really easy to just roll that piano around on it. So,
Yeah, those are pretty hard, right? They can take a lot.
Yeah. So having a really hard kind of engineered, wood, but really kind of fake wood floor could be a great choice for a room where you want to get the piano from one spot to another.
Do you feel like that flooring sounds different than wood? I mean, it has to a little bit, right?
I was very concerned with that. I did the thing and I figured out, the big challenge was like getting the people who were responsible to swap my floor out for me. And I was patting myself on the back for having gotten that job done. And the floor was now done. And then all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, oh shit, is this going to sound any good?
Right.
But then I did my first session and recorded stuff and it sounded great. And I was like, oh, good. Awesome. So yeah, I found that it worked out all right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because I'm going to have to replace some flooring in here. So
yeah, so I can't necessarily swear by it, but I can tell you that, for example, if I had real hardwood floor underneath it, maybe I would like that a little better. But I did not run into anything where I felt like I needed to blame the floor for a sound that I didn't like. Guess that's a good way to answer it. Let's talk about miking up the piano. What are some things that you've learned about recording your piano so that you like the way it lives in a track for jazz or a recording for indie rock bands or whatever?
Well, that's just it. If it's for jazz, I do one thing normally, or I might mic it the same way, but I'll treat it a little bit differently after the fact. And then rock, of course, you want it to be a little bit brighter and to poke through a little bit. But I'm usually using a pair of, like my first go-to is a pair of Neumann KM150s or 140s. KM140s. Are you familiar with those? They're like a cardioid.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think so. Yeah. Are they the small diaphragms or are they the large?
They're small diaphragms and they're they're short. They're kind of teeny. And they just sound better than the 84s, I think. I think the 84s, especially the 184s, are just too bright and brittle. And for jazz, you want to be way on the other side of that.
Yeah. I mean, the KM84s might be great for a shimmery acoustic guitar or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And these are just a little warmer than what those do. So I usually put one. So if on the right-handed side of the player, I usually have one, because of that is the shorter end. I usually have one probably about 6 inches up, and halfway back across the string, and then point it a little bit toward the player. If there are no vocals involved, if the player's not singing, you can get away with that and get a little bit more of the hammers. And then on the bass end, it's sort of the same thing, but it's going to be, back a little bit farther. It's not exactly halfway. It's maybe 2/3 of the way back to where the strings attach in the back.
Okay, so it's not like a, coincident stereo pair aimed at the hammers or anything. It's more like one mic is one zone of the piano, the other mic is a different zone of the piano.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm getting the soundboard and all that stuff. And the tricky part is on the low end because the strings cross over.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, where do you put that? So it's not like everything they play is in this one blob in the stereo field.
Okay, so how do you decide where to put things? What are some things that you hear that help you make decisions about moving the mics around?
Well, I kind of listen to the material and where they are with their left hand, because if they're playing a lot of the super low notes, which doesn't happen all that often, then I might move it a little bit more to the left. And if they're sort of in the middle, then I'm just going like, I'm treating it as those strings are the end of the piano.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then I'm not worrying about the super low ones that cross over.
What about
and that
panning?
usually works out pretty well.
What about, where do you pan these two things? Do they get panned together in mono, or do you like to split them out in stereo when you're mixing?
It depends how busy the mix is. It's pretty rare that I do the same thing for the piano. You know what I mean? It's not like I have this, like this is what I do.
Right.
I just did a live recording with I have a mobile rig that I take around every once in a while. And this was at a giant theater. And for the mix of that, because we had so much stuff going on, the piano is just sort of, it's mostly to the, I basically did it because it was shot on video and it's going to come out visually, I sort of panned it a little bit to where it was placed on stage. So the left side is all the way to the left, and then the right side is kind of down the middle. And when you stick those together, it gives you like this maybe 40% left sort of thing. And then there's a sax that is sort of on the other side of that.
Right. So in this case, you sort of create a visual image of where the instruments are on the sound stage, and that's where the panning. That's where it tells you to pan.
Yeah, that's where it seems most natural to me, because if you're and I got like a clip of it so I could see. I mean, I was there, so I know where they were placed on stage. But after seeing this clip, I was even more informed on how it should sound when you're listening to this played back. And it was kind of like, these need to be placed a little bit closer, not quite the super wide panning or anything like that. It just wouldn't be natural sounding.
All right, cool. Well, I have a lot of questions I want to ask you, so I'm going to keep jumping forward quickly. Another genre that you're working on is the indie rock stuff, where you've got like great distorted guitars, and I just love the sound that it doesn't. I love the fact that your music doesn't sound like country. Because that really is kind of where my heart is musically.
Man, I've been going for country all these years.
All these years. So I really dig it. I'm inspired by the bands you're working with. Talk to us a little bit about just recording electric guitars. So obviously electric guitars and also keyboards, but it sounds like maybe keyboards that are played through guitar amps sometimes are an important part of the bands that you're working with. How do you like to approach a guitar amp to capture the right kind of thing when a band's performing together?
Like when they're doing the initial, when I'm recording a band, I have everybody play together normally and then isolate their instruments, but they're all in the same room, but I have it cabled so I can have an amp in an ISO booth. I have another cable that goes into like my soldering room, so I can split two amps and then have a bass amp in the piano room, and then the drums are just out there, in the giant room.
And the guitar players are hearing themselves in headphones, but they're standing near the drum set.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Maybe just for a brief moment, talk about the importance of that. Have you ever tried moving the guitar players far away from the drummer? And have you learned that sort of screws up the ability of a band to play well together?
Well, I mean, it's if someone wants to play with their amp, which has happened, like or like I feel better if I'm playing in the same room as my amp, then I'll move them back there. And I mean, at that point, it's like I'm listening for a good drum take. Does it sound like they're playing together? I don't know. If the drums are good and the bass is good with it, we're going to overdub that guitar probably anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't care. They can be wherever they want. I don't care. If it makes them happy, beautiful.
Right. Have you found that, I can't help thinking that a band that rehearses together, if you can figure out a way to record them in a way that feels familiar to the way they've been rehearsing, that could be a pretty positive.
Yeah, totally. And it makes them more comfortable here because the recording studio, like if you haven't recorded a lot, it's kind of a daunting thing. So if you can make them feel more comfortable while they're here doing it, then absolutely.
What about the vocals? Do you put a scratch vocal mic out there near the drums and have somebody sing on it? Is it often a separate singer who's in another room singing along with the band performing the take?
I usually have the singer. The singer's normally playing one of the other instruments, not always, but normally. And either way, I'm going to put them in the big room with everybody else and have them do their thing. And if the room mic picks up a part of it, then great. Who cares? It's going to be on the drums just a little. You're barely going to hear it. They're going to do a vocal over it. And I've never had a problem getting it out of anything. All
right, let's clarify some of that for the rock stars who are trying to visualize this. So you've got a scratch vocal mic up for the singer. They're singing into that. The real thing, at least while you're recording, is there's going to be a whole lot of drums coming into that scratch vocal mic, right? But then you'll mute that afterwards and listen back to the band. And you're saying that sometimes you can hear the singer bleed into the room mics that are there for the drums just a little bit as well.
Yes, they're usually, I place that vocalist very carefully.
Right. You don't put them right next to a room mic.
Exactly. I usually put them, like I'm usually using cardioid, small diaphragm cardioids or something like that. Sometimes large diaphragms, but not that often.
For the room mics?
For the room mics, yeah.
Really? Small diaphragms. Okay, cool.
Yeah. They just seem a little more accurate on things that are out of their pattern, I guess.
Okay. You mean as far as what they're rejecting? They don't screw up the frequency.
Yeah, the rejected phrase. Yeah, I don't know words right now. Yes, the other things they're picking up are not totally odd sounding, which I think with a large diaphragm, if it's outside of the pattern, then if it's the rejected sound, it sounds a little odd.
Okay, cool.
You know what I mean? They're just more natural.
That's a good insight, though. I think sometimes we don't realize that at first, is that a mic, in order for a mic to reject things and have a cardioid pickup pattern, it actually has to do like phase canceling of things that are coming in from the backside and stuff. And not all mics phase cancel equally. Some kind of really kind of mess with the tone of what's off axis, and some are more respectful of that tone, I guess. Yeah.
And I was for a long time doing an MS thing for room mics with large diaphragms. And those were, and that was cool, but I felt like it picked up too much of like the kick drum and some other things. But anyway,
cool.
That's a different thing. Like you can put the singer behind that and it's going to be rejected by the side of the bidirectional mic. Because they'd be behind it, and then they'd be behind the cardioid mic facing the drums as well. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good place to put someone doing a scratch vocal in the live room with the drums. Or just like barely behind the pattern of the small diaphragm condenser. You know what I mean?
How far away are your room mics from the drum kit? What have you found to be useful places for that?
Usually like 18 or so. And I get out like a tape measure and measure all that stuff. The room, I mean, it seems if you get it within like 3 feet, because it is kind of a bigger room, if they're within like 15 to 18, 16 to 19, somewhere in there.
Feet away from the drums?
Yeah.
Okay, so you got a pretty big live room then too to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's large, and they're still like a solid like 7 or 8 feet away from the wall behind them.
Okay, and then how far away do you like to have those two mics from each other?
Well, I try to use that 3-to-1 business, which is sometimes is tough, but they're like a good over 20 feet apart, probably.
Interesting. Okay, so each mic is 18 feet back from the drums, and they're spaced 20 feet apart from each other. See,
Yeah,
I like to ask these questions because you can visualize such a different thing, until you start hearing those specifics. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, and I measure everything out because I don't want the snare to be on one side, the kick to be on the other side. That was another thing. One of your other interviews that he brought up, like, and this is especially true with overheads. You don't want to look at the kit as like a straight on thing from the drummer's perspective. You kind of have to tilt things a little bit. So you have the kick in the middle, like right between the overhead mics, and you also have the snare in the middle. So I sort of turn things a little bit to the right, like clockwise on the drum kit. And I do the same thing with the room mics. So it's not all kick in one side and snare in the other side.
And then do you feel like the room that the drums are in needs to be pretty symmetrical for what you're doing to work?
No, I actually have the drums turned a little bit so they're facing, unless that's what you mean. I have them turned a little bit counterclockwise. So
in the room,
yeah. So they're facing the snare and the kick line up to face the opposing wall.
Okay, cool. Dig it. Well, let me jump to guitars now. What are some ways, what do you choose for microphones? Do you like to use one mic on a guitar amp? Do you use a couple? Do you include room mics? Are there any helpful hints that you've learned about where to put the mic on the speaker of the amp?
I'm using Royers, like the R121, and like that's my go-to. I use that 95% of the time, probably.
Cool.
And I because it's a ribbon mic and it's a little bit darker, I put that thing right on the dust cap.
Right, and a reminder that if you're putting a mic right on the dust cap, that's considered the brightest spot of a guitar
it's going to be
right?
It's going to be bright, which works well with a ribbon mic.
Certainly makes it easier. It's kind of convenient to just go, boing, dead center, we're good,
Right. In fact, on some of my amps, I actually did the old flashlight through the grill, found where the dust cap was, and then put a little piece of tape. So I don't even have to, try to look through the grill all the time. It's just taped. I have a mark.
Nice. And does it sound different if you record it with the tape and without the tape?
It's crazy different. No.
Joke question. That we don't have to go down that road, but of course it evokes the question of whether or not you should have a single sheet of toilet paper hanging over your NS10 tweeters when you're mixing.
Doesn't it depend on which ones you have?
Exactly. So we don't have to go down that road any further than that.
I have a whole roll in front of mine just in case.
Yeah. I actually, I had room mics that were too bright on a recording. I think I was recording some drums. Maybe they were sort of like Glyn Johns-y overheads. But to darken them, I actually took toilet paper and I put a few wraps of toilet paper around the mic, and it totally shaved off a little bit of the high end. It was kind of a nice little trick for darkening the mics out on the recording floor.
But was it Continental or Northern? Do you remember?
I don't remember. It was whatever it was damn cheap toilet paper, because that's the way I shop when I go grocery shopping.
Sweet.
Okay, so you use the Royer 121, which is a killer ribbon. How close do you like to put it to the grill of the speaker?
Pretty close. I mean, maybe half an inch or something from the grill cloth.
Okay. Do you feel like those mics have a big proximity effect or not such a big proximity?
Well, I never pull them back, so I don't really know. You're at the low end doesn't seem to be like bulging when I get it closer, but I have it right on the dust cap too, so there's not a ton of low end going into it. I never want for extra low end. Right.
Okay.
So,
well, that certainly sounds like an easy way to record a guitar amp, which is great. Do you like to use second mics, or do you just tend to stick with the one and that gives you what you're looking for?
I always use a couple mics on it, so it's not just that one. And I think I haven't heard anyone that does it quite like I do it, which makes me think there's something wrong with it. But I really like the results, so I'm not going to change. But I usually use the ribbon mic right up on the amp. And then I have a room mic that is right around 9.5 feet back. And there's a reason for that. And I usually use like an SM7 or a 421 or something like that. Every once in a while, a condenser, but not that often because I don't want to get any of that high fizzy stuff. You know what I mean?
Right.
I just wanted to pick up the room in a sort of, normal fashion.
And you said an SM7 or what was the other one?
Like a 421 or something like that. And like one of the...
It's kind of a dynamic mic that kind of is not necessarily dark, but I think of a 421 as darker than an SM7. I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
just the way
Well,
I think
it seems like it has more of a capacity to pick up some of the low mids.
Yeah, yeah.
So
you're adding, the room is like you're trying to add some body to the sound, not more sizzle and highs.
Yeah, right. And some space, a little bit of space to it, which is part of the reason I don't want a bunch of high end on it. And I usually roll off a lot of the low end too.
So that room mic is like 9.5 feet back. So that's very interesting. Mm-hmm. And then how close can the wall be to that room mic?
It's by about 35 feet in this place.
Okay, cool. So now is this when you're doing guitar overdubs where you're taking over the big giant live room again? And this is how you record? Yeah, definitely. When I'm doing, if I'm recording somebody in, like if we're doing a live thing and the amp's in an ISO booth, I'll use the 121. And if they want to, like if we plan on keeping that track, then I'll either put like a 57 up to it and do like, depending on if it's like a 112 or something like that, like the Denenberg sort of, the other mic is at an angle, a 45-degree angle. Are you familiar with that one? No. Tell us about that.
Well, you line up the capsules so you make sure they're the same distance to the speaker, and then the other, you just have one mic dead on and the next mic is over 45 degrees. And then when you mix those together, and I rarely mix mics together when I'm tracking in Pro Tools because you don't really need to. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big fan of committing typically. Yeah. But in this case, I put them on two different tracks, and the way I do it is I have a stereo, like all my guitars are stereo tracks. Right. So I have the close mic on one track, the room mic on the right side normally, and then I'll use like an REQ or something like that, and that's how I'm blending in the room mic. Yeah, that's the thing I started doing recently, because the last thing I want is two separate tracks for one guitar part. I hate that. It's really frustrating, and then it's like, it's just more shit to confuse your brain when you're trying to mix and manage this stuff, or to accidentally change the blend of later after you've made all these other decisions. And so putting it on a stereo track and just using like, say, the trim plugin unlinked where you can, set your own blend of those two. Yeah, and then you have to kind of go back and forth though between the two windows, and you're going to EQ it anyway, so why not just use the... There you go. EQ. So that's what you're doing. Same thing, but you're using an EQ for that. Yeah, the Renaissance stuff just is amazing anyway, so. Cool.
This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you are ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you in whichever DAW you are using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to mix in your own studio, and even include in your mixing portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. All right, so when you do the 45-degree 57 mic as the second mic. Is that also right there, dead center at the cone, center of the cone, and angled 45?
It's sort of angling in, but the 50, it's got a bump around 5K or something like that.
Right.
So I might just take a little bit of that out with the EQ. And it's not, I set it up, and if it sounds good, great. If it doesn't, then I'll shift it off the cone a little bit, and not just the 57, but both of them. Like move it a little bit to the side, and it'll get a little bit darker, and
How often do you, you're getting a guitar sound? Is the first place you hear that guitar in the control room, and then do you walk out and maybe dial in the amp a little bit more to help the guitar player? Or do you have any strong feelings about like, I'll never touch the guitar amp, I always just move the mic or anything like that?
Well, the first thing I do is I ask them to set the amp up the way they normally have it and the way they're used to hearing it.
Yeah.
And I'll mic it up, get everything, like get my levels and all that stuff. And if I hear something I don't like, I'll, like, as I'm walking all the way to the other side of the building to the ISO booth, I'll say, hey, is it cool if I mess with your amp a little bit? And 9 times out, well, no, I don't think I've ever heard anybody go, no, man, get away from my amp.
Did it made for my amp, man.
That's right. Don't you touch it. So, so I'll just go in there and I'll do what I need to do on the amp and come back in, and they're usually happy. And the thing that I always have to mess with, especially if we plan on keeping a track, and a lot of times if we don't, it's like, check your whatever pedals you're going to use for the song, check the output level, A/B it. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people have like distortion pedals that are like 3 times louder than their clean tone, and that doesn't cut it for recording.
Or worse, it's 3 times quieter.
Yeah, that happens a lot too. And they perceive it as louder. So they have this ringing clean thing for the verses, and the chorus comes in and it's, this little angry guitar you can't hear.
I find another one is to remind, like, I'll go ask the player, I'm like, okay, which of these pedals are you actually using on this song? Just the one? Great. Can we disconnect all the others and only go through the one pedal on the way to the amp?
Are you using this DoD multi-effects unit? No? Let's take it out of the path.
Yeah. Because we're actually in bypass, it's going through the digital conversions, maybe.
Yeah, it's not good, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yet at the same time, having an open mind and being willing at any point to go, you know what? It sounds better when he goes through all this bullshit than it does when you don't go through all the bullshit. And just like making sure that I'm actually choosing whichever one sounds better. Because
have you had that happen before, where you've unplugged a whole pedal board of stuff and then it sounded better going through it?
Not often, but occasionally, And I will say I'm constantly surprised at what sounds best.
Is that an impedance thing, do you think?
I think so. I think you've got your impedance is definitely messed with. You might be, by running through all the pedals in bypass, you're going through all that cabling too. So you may actually be changing the frequency response of the guitar,
making it a little bit duller, maybe.
Yeah, and that might be a better thing in the thing in the end. So the real point for me is just like, make sure you try both. But with that out of the way, 99% of the time, if you just get the other unused pedals the hell out of there, it sounds way better. Or that distortion pedal isn't adding much. If you just go into the amp and turn that amp up, boy, that sounds a whole lot better.
Right. Unless you have to switch it during the song, and then they,
Right.
A little upset about it.
All right. So let's see. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is I noticed pretty consistently on your records, I was surprised at just how good the sense of space was around the recording. The reverbs, the delays, maybe it's just the fact that you've got a big room to work in and you can, pull out a tape measure and move mics 18 feet back or 9.5 feet back to get just the right thing. But what about using, let's just assume for a minute, well, let me ask first, are you choosing reverbs and delays at the mix stage of production? And if so, do you have sort of a way that you go through to make a decision about this is the right kind of effect I want to put on the vocal or the guitars or, the whole track to create a really awesome sense of space?
Well, just for speed purposes, and you probably have this too. I have like a template that I start with that just has all these things open and ready to go.
Plugins. When you say all these things, you're talking about plugins and
yeah, exactly. Like plugins, and like for vocals, I probably have 8 or 9 aux returns that have just different plugins on them, and different like EQs going into the plugin, or a different compressor going into the plugin for sidechain purposes and stuff like that.
Do we get to ask you right away, dude, tell us what are you using? What are some of the things you're using?
Well, I just like for the vocal reverbs, I have like a Reverb one that I like, and I have a setting that I made that I use for that. So that's a starter. Then I'll have a longer delay that might be like True Verb or something like that. Then I love the little plate that Sound Toys plugin. That's so cool. So I use that for a different reverb, and then I'll have a short delay, like a slapback, and then I'll have a longer delay that might be in quarters, or it might be like dotted eighths or something like that.
So that would be set to follow the tempo of your session, so that as the session goes to a particular tempo, that one automatically lines up for you.
Right. Yep. It just locks right up.
And a quick question about the little plate. I can't remember if that one, I think that doesn't have a pre-delay in it. Do you put a pre-delay before it? And do you find that that's an important part of getting the right plate sound?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'll delay it, and other times it just sounds good. What I'll do instead of that is have a compressor after it. So when the vocal is going on, it's triggering that compressor and bringing the front of it down. And then when they lay off, as the reverb comes up a little bit.
Oh, cool. It's like it balloons behind the vocal. Yeah,
but it's only like maybe 3 dB, 4 dB, all depending on the song. It's not all the same.
But not a sidechain compressor. It's not like you're sidechaining it from the dry vocal. It's just the sound.
No, I am.
Oh, you are? Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really glad I asked.
Yeah, and I do that with delays. I do that with a lot of stuff. Or either another thing I have is like a reverb and lo-fi that I just dirt the hell out of, and I'll use a sidechain to open a gate. You know what I mean? So it's creating this super dirty vocal that's going into that reverb, and then I'll gate it so it's just like. Right.
So when the vocal is happening, you're hearing the dirt in there, but when the vocal stops in between lines, that thing is muted in and out of there.
Yep. Yeah. Super fast.
And I love that you're so Reverb 1, for example, it's one of the Avid reverbs, right?
Yeah.
It comes with Pro Tools. I don't remember if it comes with Pro Tools or if it's an add-on or not, but
I think that one's an add-on. I think Deverb might be and the Air.
But lo-fi is included, and it's just right there ready and waiting for us to use.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a ton of processing.
That's cool. So, and it's one of those surprising plugins where I think, what was one of the tricks Chris James talked about on the podcast, and maybe I saw Andrew Sheps talk about it, where you just set the distortion to 1% and you just put it on whatever you're doing, and it just makes it sound better.
Oh, yeah. And another cool thing is with the sample rate, I guess is what it's called in that plugin. Yeah. But you can change that, and you can actually automate that if you want to do some crazy stuff with the high end. It sounds like a filter effect. That's cool. Hot tip
indeed, man.
Tip.
We love hot tips.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me touch on a topic here again. So I asked about pre-delay, and then you talked about side chaining stuff. I'll begin by answering the question, which is, both of those are attempts to clear up the vocal as it's happening, but allow us to still use lots of effect. So it's like when the vocal is singing, it's clear and we're hearing it. And then as the vocal finishes, you hear the effect in there. Do you have anything more you want to say about that? But that's essentially, why we might reach for a pre-delay, unless you want to hear an actual echo of the reverb, and why you might sidechain the effects, right?
Right. And I sidechain it either way, because sometimes you want the effect to happen while the vocalist is singing, and you don't want it to sort of tail off as much. So you can, like I was saying with the gate, on that dirty reverb, you can kind of do the same thing with an expander. You know what I mean? So when the vocalist is singing, it's going to the reverb, you're hearing the reverb. And then when the vocalist stops, like in between phrases or whatever, it gates some of that out. So it just sort of thickens the vocal.
More reverb during the vocal and less reverb in between.
Yeah, not just reverb, like other things too. Like I use a lot of doublers and stuff like that.
Cool. I like this, man. I like it. It's just a cool reminder to mixing isn't as simple as just throw a reverb on there. It either is reverb or it isn't reverb. No, it's like you can use many different kinds. You can decide whether you want to hear lots of it while they're singing and none of it in between the lines, or you can decide you want to hear none of it while they're singing and lots of it in between the lines. So it's I think like
the fact that a lot of reverbs have an EQ built in on them is a big deal too, because especially with drums, I hate hearing the really high end reverb. You know what I mean? Like when somebody hits a cymbal or the snare, even if you have a lot of reverb on it and you hear this just sounds really fake to me.
Right.
So I roll off a lot of high end and low end because I don't want any extra low end that I don't need messing up like the kick drum or the bass guitar.
Do you feel like putting effects on drums, typically you're just trying to make it sound like it's part of the real drum sound, or do you often get to put effects on drums where you're trying to create a drum sound that's totally unrealistic, but works great for the song production?
I'm usually going for natural and nasty, kind of a combination of that for this indie stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I'll distort stuff, distort room mics, things like that. On that Personal Public song I sent you, I used a delay. Then that intro part in the drums, you could hear it kind of so
nice.
And that was like a dirty delay.
That stuff's fun to do. But when you talk about like adding something to the drums and then it sounds sizzly and doesn't sound real, I do find that's like one of the quick reactions that we have. Like a lot of times we put something on a sound and then a moment later we're like, shit, man, that just doesn't sound good, or it doesn't sound realistic. And it's one of the challenges in finding the right kind of reverbs for drums is something that makes the drums sound bigger and more exciting, more of what you already like in them, but doesn't take them to a strange place that sounds fake.
Yeah, I remember a long time ago, I was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years into doing this. One of my clients said it sounded like the kick and the snare were in two different rooms. And that was like, I wasn't using any samples or anything at that time. So it was like, well, how do I like make this congeal a little bit, and become one drum kit?
What are some typical things you do to add, reverb to the drum recording at mix?
I usually have two different reverbs. One is like a standard, like this is a room, but more. So it's like a shorter, like under 1 second reverb, like usually around 700 or 800 milliseconds. So I'll use that and roll off some of the highs and the lows. And then I'll have another reverb that is longer that I'll mostly send the snare to and the toms to a lesser degree. And maybe like some of the other stuff, just not as much, like the snare is getting most of it. And I'll just use that. It's a longer one, usually 1.5 seconds. It depends on the tempo of the song. But I'll just use that or bump it up in the choruses or the larger sections. So the drums seem to grow with it,
Nice. That's cool. Yeah. It's also a good reminder that, I think when you're mixing, an initial goal is to find a static fader level for everything that seems to kind of work throughout the whole song. But then remember that for the finished version of this mix, we're going to have to move some shit around,
Mm-hmm. And if you're using samples, like bringing samples in and out or up or down or whatever in different sections is a good idea.
Do you want to talk about that process for you a little bit? I mean, you're breaking it out on the console. Where are you moving things? Are you moving faders in the console? Or are you automating in Pro Tools?
Well,
do you have like a process where you're like, okay, now it's time for me to start writing in fader moves?
Yeah, I do that later on in the process because while I'm getting a basic mix, I don't want to have to flip over to the edit side and move the entire volume line. You know what I mean? I want to be able to move everything where I'm going to move it. And then at that point, I'll do my automation.
Right.
And normally at some point, I'll just decide to listen. This part is usually pretty early on. I'll listen to the song, and if I don't already have markers for everything, I will create markers. So I'll have the start of the song, any events in the song that I feel like I might want to do something different in, I'll create a marker for it. So I'll go from the beginning of the song, which is called Start. And then...
That's a good name.
Yeah. And then it'll be, like if it's just a guitar intro, I'll make a marker for when the drums come in. And as that goes along, it'll be like first verse. If vocals come in later, I'll make a marker for first verse vocals. And then the next thing would be like chorus 1, and then post chorus, maybe, depending on how the song is. And then I'll use those markers and bring up that little marker window and do a lot of like click on one thing, hold down shift, click on the next thing, highlight that area. And that's how I'm doing some of those slight moves instead of trying to like click on it and drag over to where you think the next, you know what I mean? That sort of means it seems a little bit more accurate when I make the markers like that, and it's way faster.
All right, hold on. I'm going to have you break that down for us again. So I've gotten as far as dropping markers, pulling up the marker window, seeing them. I know that if I click on a marker and shift click on another one, it selects a certain zone across my song. But but I think I got lost right after that. Can you keep elaborating?
If you put the cursor in a certain track, like let's say we want to automate the guitar sub, which I always use is like I'm subbing my guitars into 2 tracks before I run them out into the console. Mm-hmm. Not all the guitars, but like the rhythm guitars, lead guitars have their own channels they go through. But I will put the cursor in the guitar sub track and then click on that marker, which will take you to say chorus 1. Hold down shift, click on the next marker you want that automation to cover, which would be, let's say it just goes back into a verse. So I would click on chorus 1, verse 2. It's going to highlight that area on my guitar sub. And at that point, I can change the volume, which if I'm making changes like that, it's not very much. It's usually a dB or less.
And when you say change the volume, you're just talking about trimming the volume line up there?
Trimming the volume line, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, dig it. So it's like you're making, instead of riding the fader up in right mode, where you have to hold the fader in this new position all the way through the mix, all the way through the chorus to the next verse, you're just simply trimming up a big chunk of it and sort of working in big sections.
I start off in big sections like that. And then if I have smaller things, then I'm going into like touch or latch or something like that on the individual track and sort of moving that within it.
Can you describe how touch and latch work?
If you are in touch mode and you touch on the fader of that channel that you're trying to automate, it'll record automation from the moment you touch it or click on it, depending on how you're working, until you let go. And then when you let go, it goes back to the original volume.
Right.
And you can set how fast that happens in the preferences on Pro Tools. If you're working in a different DAW, I don't know how much it translates, but it has to some degree, right?
Yeah. So the when you let go of the fader, it could either snap back up really quickly to the original volume line, or it can kind of ease its way up slowly if you want it to.
Right. And you can just specify in milliseconds how fast you want that to be. I always have mine pretty quick because I'm letting go of something as another section of the song is coming in or something like that.
That's one of those things I just never change in the preferences. I always just roll with whatever it is. Maybe I need to look at it again and find out. Maybe it's been fighting me all these years.
It could be. I think the way it's set up, like if you chuck your preferences, which how you do sometimes.
Yeah, right.
I think it's set really long.
Is
it's
it?
Like,
okay, all right.
Yeah, like 300 milliseconds or something like that, which is...
Oh yeah, I would think like 20 milliseconds or something.
Yeah, that's like where I move it. That's where I move it to. Yeah, something super fast.
Okay, so now what about latch mode? How do you describe what that does?
In latch mode, whatever track you're working with, you click on the fader. If you're talking about volume, because there are a lot of things you can change, click on the fader and move it to wherever you want it to be. And once you let go of it, it's still recording, but at that level. So it stays there until you hit stop. in
and
Pro
then
Tools.
and then it immediately snaps back. And I wondered if it snaps back at
was.
300 milliseconds or if it snaps back instantly.
I think it's immediate. It's just in touch that it gives you the glide time.
The one thing that I've always longed for, and I haven't figured out how to do it, believe it or not, is latch mode. Let's say you ride something up and you're like, I just want it to stay up for the rest of the song to the outro, through the outro. I just want the snare at this new level. I don't remember if there's a latch mode setting that even if you hit stop in Pro Tools, it'll write it at that level all the way to the end of the song.
You open up the automation window and you got to be real tricky about it and use see how far you can stretch your hand, because if you can hit, I think it's Command 4 brings up the automation window. So you can bring it up. And as you do that, hit there's a right to end button in that window, and that'll just zap it to the rest of the song.
Perfect. Love it. All right, cool. Good tips, man. Talk more now about the effects. Well, I guess we kind of covered that. We were talking about your great parallel effect chain for vocals and stuff like that. One question though, is you describe these great ways to create effects, and you basically just opened up our palette of what we possibly can do. In other words, it's not just reverb on or reverb off. It's all these other things. How do you arrive at a bold move as far as putting the song and the production in a space? Because obviously it could be like one of many things. How do you know when you're going the right direction?
That is a good question. I guess you just sort of like the song inspires you in one way or another, and that's the direction you go. I try not to fight with it. I just, say, hey, song, where are we going with this? And if it's nasty, then that's where we're going.
And you don't have to try every single possibility, right? You can just kind of go with something, and then if it feels good.
Yeah, after a while, you're gonna know which things to choose and which things not to use.
Yeah. What about the faders on the console? When do you reach for those faders and start moving them around, or do they tend to also? I
touch them. I touch the master fader, and that's it.
So the individual faders are just all at 0.
They're at -5 is how I came to my gain staging perfection.
Okay, and is that like a real science, or is that just over trial and error of mixing?
That's just listening. That's just listening to everything and how it all ended up working out, because I'm coming through the board and I have the trims or the line levels all set and calibrated in the console. And then it just comes out of the faders at -5. And then I have it going to, I'm using the inserts in the master section of the board and going out into this TK audio, SSL beast sounding compressor. Sometimes I have a massive passive EQ that I go through sometimes too. And then I bring it back in, because I am using the inserts on the master fader. I bring it back into that and then send it back into Pro Tools.
Print it on its own track.
Yes.
Now, I know one of the things that is nice about printing it on its own track is if you had a mix that was really great and you just wanted to change one little bit of it, you have the option to sort of punch in on that mix, just move faders around on the console, make some crazy change, and then just punch right in there. Do you ever do that, or do you tend to just sort of create new mixes every time you want to make a change?
I do it on longer pieces. If it's a shorter thing, like a 3.5, 4 minute, pop rock song, whatever, then I usually just bounce it. And that's that. And I'm listening to it as it goes. If it's a long thing, like some of these jazz tracks that are 15 minutes long, then recording it back in is definitely a way that makes more sense, just because you can do that, little pieces. Probably if you hear something and you're 12 minutes into the song, you're like, damn it, I have to go back and rebounce this thing. I mean, that's no good.
All right, cool, man. Hey, well, we're coming up on nearing the end of our interview here. Let me jump to some of our closing questions and ask you a couple of things. You are working with jazz artists. You're working with a lot of indie bands.
Who else I worked with is Tim Easton, who you had on
Tim's
on
great,
your podcast.
Man. Well, you're from Columbus.
That's right. I assisted on those Haynes Boys things. I don't know if he remembers or not. But,
and I just met a drummer that works with Tim, a nice guy named Ryan at at our best pizza place. So shout out to you, Ryan, if you're listening to this.
Nice. Yeah. Sorry to interject.
No,
Continue.
that's quite all right. Tim's awesome, man. Do you
I
have
got
any
excited.
stories
That
you
was
want to
a great
share about
interview.
working with him?
No, except for I agree with everything he said about his condition when he was there. So yeah,
nice.
He's a nice guy though. That was a great interview, by the way.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, so I wanted to jump to some more closing questions. Let me go straight to the business question. So basically, do you have anything that you want to share, tips and resources for the business side of doing this? Here, you've run 3 iterations of a studio. We talked about this a little bit before our interview too, but you've worked with many indie rock bands and talked about things that are wonderful about that and some of the things that are a little frustrating about it sometimes. And we kind of riffed on the idea that when a band puts art first, it can make some beautiful music, but sometimes that can leave the business of music behind because art is first. So what would you like to say about stuff you've learned about operating the business of a studio if people want to do this for more than just a hobby?
Well, boy, that's a tough question. I would say choose the people that you're working with like do some background, I guess. I don't know. Make sure that the people you choose to work with are good people who are going to do what they say they're going to do. And, just hold up their end and not screw you over in the end. That's all.
What are the things that feel like getting screwed over?
I've hired people to do things that just, they didn't follow through on their end. And it's not just the money that you waste with them, it's the time that you waste.
Mm-hmm. Plus you don't get the job done.
Right. And then you have a weird conversation at the end, and every music community is pretty small. So the less conversations about someone else pissing you off are typically better.
Yeah. A good takeaway I've found is that for every thing that doesn't go right, rather than having a conversation about how somebody else screwed up, just internalize it and figure out how you could just improve your own methods to avoid that happening again. It's usually more useful.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And then just come to peace with the other things and, let it ride.
What about just, real geeky things like, smart tips about getting paid, invoicing? If you're working with indie bands, you're not interacting with, does this mean you're not working with the management or not working with a record label? You're just talking directly to, an artist or here's a tough question. If it's a band, who's in charge? Who are you talking to?
Well, you have to pinpoint who the band dad or mom is. There's always somebody in the band that is the responsible one that handles all that stuff. And that's the person that you want to have these conversations with. Mm-hmm. And if it's a new band I've never worked with, depending, it's like a lot of times I'll ask for like 50% down. If they book a weekend out, I'll say I need like 50% to book it out a week ahead of time, because if you bail and I have 4 days to fill a weekend, that's probably not going to happen.
Right.
So I try to get that a little bit ahead of time. And I also, this is the thing that kills me, is like if you have a band of 5 people and you tell them like this is the invoice, and they have each individual person in the band hand you, like $180 each, and then there's like, well, Jimmy still owes you his part. It's like, no, you guys have to collect that to get like build one pile and hand it to me, as opposed to like I'm running around trying to get money from 3 different people of the same band.
Right.
So so make sure you make someone the person in charge and discuss financial things with them.
Now, I find that same tip goes for mix revisions and notes on the mixes. I don't want to get emails and text messages from 5 different people about scattered ideas.
And they're always different. Like one guy's bring the snare up, and the next person emails you and said, the snare seems kind of loud. Can you turn that down?
Right.
All in the same mix. So it's like people need to talk to each other and then come at me with like one like set of notes. I like using like Google Docs or something like that, where everyone is looking at the same thing, so they can kind of get their thoughts together. And I have those immediately when I go to do mix changes.
Do you find that it's always best to assign somebody as the money person and the spokesperson, or is that asking too much of a group of people, and it's better to just remind them to talk to each other and hand you one pile of money or look at the Google Doc and give us one.
You kind of figure it out. You kind of figure out who that person is in each band, because you know what I mean. Someone's tends to come forward with things where the other guys just want to play.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Right.
So and once you figure that out, you can have conversations with them. And if it's a text message, if you feel like it's getting out of hand with like too many people giving input without them discussing it together first, you can do something like a group email or a group text message and say, all right, come together, give me notes that are, a consensus between everyone by this day, and I'll make those changes, as opposed to, doing the other. You can kind of wrangle people,
Now, when you're doing changes, here you've got this console laid out. Can you still recall a mix and make a change to it? Do you have any tips and if you're recalling the console somehow, do you have any tips for how to do that?
I do. And this is a big one. This saves tons of time. I use not voicemail, like my little voice memo thing on my phone. And I'll just read down tell myself where all the settings are. And it's not going to be 100%, but I'm going to on EQs and stuff like that, I'll be within, half a dB or something like that, which is close enough for analog. If you know what I mean.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll just go through and I'll say the snare is coming down track 3. The EQ is this, this, and this. The pan is set to this. The aux is set to this. Channel 4 is the kick drum. So I can read through that. I can recall this board in 6 minutes tops.
Nice.
So, that's a lot of knobs and outboard stuff. So
I like that method a lot. In fact, after I've worked really hard on something, I find it can be much easier for me to just verbalize all the things I just did. And I'll sometimes use the video camera feature on my phone. And if I had some really complex setup in the studio, right in that moment afterwards, I'll take my camera out, put it in video mode, walk around and just point at things, talk to myself. And that can be really helpful. I mean, I might have to watch through a 15-minute video afterwards, but it's a lot better than having to reinvent
listening
the
and
wheel.
saying, where was that microphone?
Yeah.
It sounds like it was 3 inches back from that kick drum.
Any final tips about, if you do a 50% up front and a 50% later, any advice about the 50% later that can be challenging for the rock stars to be aware
Not
of?
really, because they don't get any of the material until it's paid up. I mean, the only thing I share are, for mix notes, are MP3s, which are not really, if somebody bails and just uses an MP, that's never happened to me.
Right.
So I don't share wave files until they're all paid up. And
nice. All right, cool. Well, that makes it easy right there. And if there was a service out there that allowed you to, send somebody a link and they could only stream it but not download it, do you think that would be really useful as far as showing people what the results are and then making sure you get paid at the end?
Yeah, I would think that would be useful. Do you use something like that?
No, not yet, but I'm aware that they are. I'm aware that some exist and some are probably going to be appearing, and so I'm kind of excited about those possibilities.
You sound like you're going to make one.
No, I'm not making one myself, but I may or may not be talking to people who are.
Yes, it's a great idea. I would use that for sure.
Yeah. Well, very cool, man. Well, let me hit you with the final question. This one is hypothetical. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You're going to go find young Jon Fintel, 15 years old, writing songs on your guitar. Dude, we didn't even get to talk about songwriting. We'll have to do that on another episode sometime. Okay. And you're going to, knock on the bedroom door. It's like, hello? That was your 15-year-old voice.
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
You come in, you're like, listen, John, I'm you much later, and I have a deeper voice now, and I've come to give you this bit of rock and roll advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a recording studio, be a rock star of the recording studio one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could? Stop recording from cassette to cassette and making shitty sounding songs?
No, I'd say keep doing that. I would say that you have to just remember that you're only as good as your last mix, your last project. And if you treat every project like that, you're going to be okay.
All right. Good advice, man. What do we do when our last project wasn't so good? Don't sweat it. Make the next one better.
What a shitty question. You beat yourself up, you cry about it, and you come back the next day. I don't know.
Nice. I'll throw this out there. You go, okay, cool, man. Well, I already know I can be better than that, so my next move's easy.
But yeah, don't make your next project sound so good that you can't top it. The one after that.
Oh man. Groovy. All right. Well, Jon, thanks so much for being on Recording Studio Rockstars with us. Thank you for going through Herculean efforts with me to get a great sounding recording for you.
Definitely. I feel like I've grown.
We've grown together.
That's right.
Thanks, let the Rockstars know how they can find you online. How can they go check out your awesome music, and where do they need to go when it's time to make a killer sounding record?
I am coming out of Relay Recording in downtown Columbus, Ohio. The website for that is relayrecording.com. And you can also reach me at jonfintel.com, which is JONFINTEL.com.
Okay, cool. But I was trying to copy your pronunciation and saying Jon Fintel. You kind of
that's right. Fintel.
Right?
There's Fintel, and then some people say Fintel.
Right.
So, if you're like from Northwest Ohio, like I am, it's Fintel.
All right. There you go.
If you're from anywhere else, it's Fintel.
All right. Well, there you go. I am from anywhere else, so I will now say Fintel.
That's fine.
All right, dude. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Can't wait to meet you in person and come see the studio sometime. And you're in good company up there. I've talked to a number of great producers and engineers up from the Columbus area. And, just shout out to Ohio in general. I mean, you mentioned Dayton briefly, and you mentioned recording on cassettes, and that's where Guided by Voices is from too. And one
Don't
of my
I know
favorite
it?
bands. All right, dig it, man. Thanks so much, dude. We'll see you around the studio.
Well, thanks, Lidge.
All right, talk soon. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. Also, remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with these weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free mixing course at mixmasterbundle.com. Look for the link in the show notes. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio, all totally free. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.